Big Ten Media Days kick off this week. How should Tony Petitti structure his messaging around realignment?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. Getting you ready for the season. We've always got you covered. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That is Craig Sheeman, Locked On Big Ten, joining me here on the show. We'll talk about window programs in the SEC and Big Ten coaches who need to win in 2024. Is Lincoln Riley really at the top of the list? All coming up later today. But let's start with the realignment angle here, Craig. This question is going to get asked to Tony Petitti when he makes his introductory remarks at Big Ten Media Days starting on Tuesday, the 23rd of July, 2024, because Florida State and Clemson, they want to get out. There was a report from Jason Scheer of Wildcat Authority that they could wind up in the Big 12, and that's a legitimate option for them now. And the SEC didn't shut things down, but also didn't project anything last week at SEC Media Days of we're open for business, we're aggressively looking to expand. Do you think the Big Ten takes the SEC neutral approach, the aggressive approach of we're looking to add, or the defensive we're not looking to add any more teams, we're good with 18?
Well, it's a lot to unpack there, and it's all part of this storyline. It's fascinating. I think there's a difference between what's going on behind the scenes and what will go on publicly and what Tony Petitti will be willing to admit this week in Indianapolis. So let's start with that. He's going to be asked the question. It's the most important question everybody wants the answer to. What's their stance, particularly with Florida State and Clemson with these lawsuits going on as they're trying to get out of the ACC? I think publicly he will say, hey, we're good. We're ready to go. We're ready to welcome our 4 Pac-12 teams, and we're excited about the season. And I think that's about what he's going to say. I know Sankey down in the SEC had a similar approach. He said, look, we're good with our 16 teams. I would tend to believe him more than I would Petitti. I still think there's something going on. But you were right. There's a lot of stories going on, and all of a sudden the Big 12 is happening. First of all, Florida State and to a lesser extent Clemson, who seems to be going along for the ride, even though they're involved in a lawsuit too, a separate one. Florida State has to do its due diligence, because if they get out of this horrible ACC deal, if they win in court, or if they come up with a settlement, and by the way, their deadline to announce if they're going to play in 2025 has to be made by August 15th. So that's just a few weeks away. If there's a settlement in the works, they got to have a place to go, because they're out of there. And if all of a sudden they can pull the trigger and
no takesy backsies.
Yeah, that's it. You're not going back to the ACC. That's not an option. And I think, obviously the Big Ten is in a position of leverage and power, and they can kind of let this ride out a little bit to the 11th hour if they want to. Florida State's like, hey, we got to have a plan in place. And I think that's where the Big 12 chatter has come up here in the past 2 weeks. Because Florida State's got to talk to somebody, just in case the Big Ten doesn't pull the trigger. Although I still like it. I still think it makes sense. I still would like to see both those schools come over to the Big Ten, but I'm greedy that way, and we'll see what happens. But, so first we got to get some sort of settlement with Florida State and the ACC, and then they got to find a place to go. We'll see what that landing spot is.
I think an unquestioned advantage of bringing Florida State and Clemson into the Big Ten is the perception of your league takes a positive hit forward. So I guess not a hit. You have another feather in your cap, but your league is going to be looked at in a way where 9-3 teams will have a better chance of making the playoff. And I think that adding the 4 former Pac schools absolutely strengthens the league. Oregon's an immediate contender. Washington, we know, can be. USC absolutely can be. I'm not as high on UCLA's long-term prospects, but Deshaun Foster is recruiting well early in his tenure, but at the very least, they'd be 3 years away or 2 years away from doing anything of relevance in the Big Ten landscape. But if you add Florida State and Clemson, these are programs and coaches and teams that are ready to win and come in and contend and compete right away. And so suddenly, whether or not you have them on your schedule or not, I think a lot more leeway would be given to other schools that go 9-3, and people would say, well, they're in the Big Ten, and sure, then they would dive into their schedule, but there is something to how your league is viewed and what a win-loss record in this conference means versus another one.
I had somebody I also have a radio show. Somebody on Thursday tried to talk to me in Florida. Four losses, that they would have an argument to getting into the 12-team college football playoff, given that their record is brutal compared to, say,
Florida Gators.
Yeah. Their record is absolutely, or their schedule is absolutely insane. So
it's the hardest in college football. The hardest in college football. I still don't know about 8-4.
I still think we may see like 1 3-loss team. Nobody with 4s get in. Anyway, these are the kind of conversations I have throughout the day. You know, in Florida State, why would you spend all this time and money to get out of the ACC, to go to the Big 12, which just lost its 2 most marketable teams in Texas and Oklahoma? And by the way, Big 12, they only pay their schools a couple $1 million a year more than the ACC does right now. I mean, the jump if they go to the Big 10 or the SEC is like 2.5 times what they would get. It's like you spend all this time jumping out of one bad deal going into another because you've got nowhere else to go. That's why I still think those schools will do just about anything to get into the Big 10.
That's my feeling as well. The numbers have actually been that the Big 12 is a couple $1 million a year less. It's a pretty negligible amount. It's not the sort of gap you see from the Big 10 and SEC to everybody else. So it's, fake money at some level, but for those schools, it's real. And, if you added the travel costs of the Big 12, it would certainly be an even bigger draw on the budget for your athletic department. And look, I think that it would be a move of spite to go to the Big 12 if you're Florida State and Clemson. And when has a move of spite ever been the right course of action in human history? Because it would be a beneficial move for you to get to the Big 10 or SEC. Even if you took a reduced media rights payout initially, that would be a successful long-term play. But if you went to the Big 12, you know what you'd be trying to do? Get your way into the Big 10 or SEC.
Yeah, and you don't want to do that twice. I mean, and deal with exit fee. Look, they're going to have to pay something. It's
going to be hundreds of millions.
I don't think they're going to win this lawsuit. I think they're going to have to settle their way out of it. It's a pretty airtight deal, even though it's a horrible deal to get out of the ACC. So you're talking $140 million just for the exit fee. You're talking all the broadcast rights fees, 2036. This is like a $600 and $700 million problem. And why would you go to another conference that doesn't pay that much? Meanwhile, the Big 10 and the SEC, I've seen projections within a couple of years. Schools are approaching $100 million a year. Right now, it's SEC, I think, is 65. Big 10 will be 70. This is going to approach $100 million a year. The Big 12 will never get to that. And certainly the ACC, if they still exist, won't get toward that kind of a number ever.
Yeah, I think that I agree with your initial take that Petitti will have a line similar to what Greg Sankey came up with last week at SEC Media Days. We are 16 strong. We are 16 today. We are 16 tomorrow. And my response to that question was, what's tomorrow? Literally tomorrow? Metaphorically tomorrow? Forever tomorrow? What is tomorrow? And he said, we can stay at 16 teams for a long time. Well, that's true. That doesn't mean you can't add Florida State and Clemson if you don't think the time and the price are right. I presume that's what we'll hear, but we'll just have to wait and see. We might even bring Craig right back on the show. Craig Sheeman, Locked On Big Ten. Craig, appreciate it as always.
You betcha, Spencer.
We're going to pop back to the SEC for just a moment. A couple of window programs to talk about. Ole Miss or Missouri? Who's having a better year in 2024? That's coming up next. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch, which is, much better for you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you're looking for. You get a panoramic view of your seat before you arrive, so you know exactly what to expect when you sit down. Take the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Which window program is ready to pop in the SEC this year? That's Caroline Fenton of Yahoo Sports joining me here to discuss on the show, live and in person, recording at SEC Media Days. This be Thursday, of course. And so I'm just thinking about Ole Miss and Missouri specifically, because those are two teams that I think a lot of people fairly, given their recent track records, would be described as window programs, where you got to build up and you got an opportunity and you got to seize it because it's not going to be back next year. And Ole Miss, they feel like they have that opportunity. And Missouri, they haven't lost a lot to the portal. They lost their defensive staff, but both of those teams feel like they have big opportunities. Which one do you think wins more games in 2024?
Just for context, are we putting in that top tier Georgia, Texas, Alabama?
Yes.
Okay, fair.
Yes.
Between Ole Miss and Missouri, I have to go Ole Miss. And that's not to say that I don't think that Missouri has the opportunity to be a playoff team, because I absolutely do. Also, looking at their schedule, I understand that they play Alabama and Georgia. Tough draw. But outside of that, it's a manageable schedule. But I go Ole Miss because there are fewer question marks as far as talent. What was the number one issue that Lane Kiffin addressed that Ole Miss that's why they couldn't beat Georgia, why they couldn't be that top-tier SEC program? Well, they weren't physical enough, and they weren't big enough on the defensive side of the ball.
Trench play. It came down to
the trenches. How do you win and lose in this league? In the trenches. So what does he do? Who goes out and gets Walter Nolan, the number one defensive player not named Caleb Downs in the transfer portal. He goes out and gets Princely Mamiellen, who comes in with a ton of experience and was really effective for Florida last year. So any deficiency that we could have identified on Ole Miss's roster, they didn't just address it. They didn't just fill it with a name. They filled it with a really good and experienced player. So my question about Ole Miss is, can you make everything vibe? Can you make everything click? Can everything come together? All of the pieces in the transfer portal that they brought in on both sides of the ball, that's a lot, to come together and all make sure that it's one cohesive unit. That's really my biggest question with Ole Miss, though. Can it work? Can it all fit together? It's not a matter of talent.
Yeah, I love what they did this offseason, not just bringing in a lot of players, not just bringing in talented players, but bringing in what feels like the right guys for the needs. Yeah, very strategic additions. And I think Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, who's been described as the portal king.
Yeah.
And, he talked earlier last week at SEC Media Days about how, I've had some success in the portal. I was like, that's a humble way to put it.
Yeah, Lane, you have.
Yeah.
I think Ole Miss is going to be an interesting case study because we've seen it's a new transfer portal era, right? We're only a few years into it.
We're like two cycles, two or three cycles.
We feel like we know, we have everything figured out. We don't. I think we know that you can't ignore the transfer portal.
Right.
You can't be Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
So far, you can't do that.
True.
So far, at least the formula that feels like it works is developing talent out of high school and recruiting 4s and 5 stars and being a top recruiting class in the country, for a few years, and also supplementing in the portal, a healthy mix of both. Right now, it seems like you cannot be that program that just completely dismisses the transfer portal because everybody else is getting better and you're not. What we don't know yet is, can you be a transfer portal team? Can you be a team that's successful
Colorado.
by building a team and a roster? Not building a program, not building up a deep recruiting roots. We're going to build a team, and we're going to find the most talented players in the transfer portal that can come and help us right away. And if they're here for 1 year, they're here for 1 year because we're focused on this year.
Yeah, I think it's become even more so for coaches that are more entrenched at their schools or have the ability to succeed. It's a year-to-year proposition.
Totally.
And there are certainly exceptions. You look at Hugh Freeze at Auburn, for instance, is a great example of, they should be better this year. And I talked about that last week on the show. They should be better. But does anyone expect them to microwave this into, hey, go make the SEC championship game? I don't think even Auburn fans do. But you mentioned the portal high school balance, and coaches get asked about this a lot, and people talk about it. And I think it's an interesting conversation because you look at a place like USC, who plays LSU week 1 in Las Vegas on Sunday, standalone game. It should be fantastic. Yeah, you're an LSU girl.
It's gonna be awesome.
It is going to be awesome. But so So USC brought in all those transfers year one, and it worked. I know they lost the Pac-12 championship game and lost the Cotton Bowl in terrible fashion if you're a USC fan to Tulane, but they went 11-1. Like that was it working. But then year two, to take a step back, go 7-5 in the regular season. I think it's why
with the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback.
I think it's why it's still a case study. Clemson's at one end, Colorado's at the other end. Everybody else is in the middle in different ways in that spectrum of how much of your roster needs to be from the transfer portal and how much needs to be built from your high school recruiting class. And I think Ole Miss is kind of closer to the Colorado side, but I don't think they're all the way over there.
And I don't think that you're going to have a team that's just completely made up of transfer portal players, because you're always going to be recruiting. And I don't know if a coach can comfortably do that and say that, I'm going to be here in 3 years if I'm not recruiting. But I think that Ole Miss is the closest thing that we have seen to a quote-unquote super team or a portal team, or the closest thing to purely NFL free agency that we've seen in the modern transfer portal.
It's even more open. The NFL free agency has restrictions.
Yeah.
There are no limits on the portal.
There are contracts.
Yeah. There are like actual obligations.
Like you are contractually obligated to play there.
You can't, in the NFL, you can't become a free agent whenever you want.
Yeah, Brandon Ayuk, like if he was in college, he'd be in the portal.
Oh, he would have hit the portal months ago.
He'd be gone.
That's a great example, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. But I want to talk about the other team we mentioned at the start of this segment, that's Missouri. They're kind of an enigma to me because they definitely popped up last year, and they have been more of that kind of window program. And I think the question for them is this the final year of the window, or was last year the window? And did they just not have a 12-team playoff to be a part of and have all the stars kind of aligned for that sort of year? Because I look at Missouri and I think, I know you got Brady Cook, I know you have Luther Burden, I know you have Eli Drinkwitz back, like that's all great. But is the rest of the team on the same level as Ole Miss to push for a playoff spot? Can they really rise that far above Tennessee or Oklahoma or all these other teams that probably aren't SEC title contenders but are going to try to be 10-2 and make the playoff at the end of the year? That's what I just don't know. I don't have a feeling one way or the other on Missouri. What do you think?
Where is your apprehension? Just the level of talent? I'm going to pull up their schedule. I'm not ignoring you.
Yeah. I'd say the overall talent level, and though I think Eli Drinkwitz is clearly a good coach, I've seen him do this once, where he plays at that sort of level. Now, if you had a 12-team playoff in 2024, Missouri certainly would have been in it. But I don't know. It could just be a trust factor because we've watched Missouri for a long time. They haven't been good consistently. So maybe that's just me instinctually having trouble trusting them. But people could say the same thing about Ole Miss, and I'm with you. I feel really good about Ole Miss's chances
I feel good about Ole Miss's chances, but I also need to see Lane Kiffin win some of these big games.
That's true, and I think that's a fair apprehension to have and a question to ask. And at Missouri, I know you just brought up their schedule. Theirs, I think, is one of the most favorable in the SEC, and I think that's why their win total is higher. Like, I don't know if they're actually one of the 3 best rosters in the SEC. I think they're a good team that has a really favorable schedule.
They are not one of the 3 best rosters in the SEC. Georgia is above Missouri. I think Alabama would be above Missouri. Texas would be above Missouri. I would put LSU above Missouri. Ole Miss above Missouri. But all of those other programs, or some of those other programs that I mentioned, have more questions than maybe Missouri doesn't. The defensive coaching staff, I think, is a massive deal. Blake Baker came in the 2020, at the end of the 2021 season, and Missouri was one of the worst defenses in all of college football. Year 1, they're up to like the 50s. Year 2, they're one of like a top 25 ranked defense, and they've got first-round draft picks, which is not. It might be a little bit more few and far between at Missouri versus other SEC programs of consistently churning out first-round talent. We are going to see how important not just Blake Baker, but also Kevin Peoples was to that defense, the defensive line coach. They both went to LSU. But it's Brady Cook and Luther Burden to me. Luther Burden's the best wide receiver in the SEC.
That guy is
like whatever we say
about
Luther Burden, we're not talking about him enough.
I remember the
if Luther
touchdown.
Burden played at Alabama.
Yeah.
He would be a household name. I don't care if you're a football nut
I think
or
he'd
not.
be a dark horse Heisman candidate at a bigger school.
I think he's a Heisman candidate now, and I think that he should be considered a Heisman candidate. He's the best receiver in the SEC, one of the best, if not the best receivers in all of college football. The question offensively that I have with Missouri is, what does this run game look like without Cody Schrader being your bell cow back? He was the leading rusher in the SEC last year. I think they're going to adopt more of a running back by committee until a quote-unquote bell cow back kind of separates himself from the rest of the pack if and when that does in fact happen. So with a kind of a changed up run game, when Brady Cook doesn't have that kind of safety and security net of Cody Schrader that he really trusts, how much does this offense change? Maybe it doesn't, but maybe it does kind of change Brady Cook. I think that Missouri, let's look at their schedule. Murray State, Buffalo,
Okay.
Boston College.
I haven't heard a loss yet.
Vanderbilt.
Still haven't.
At Texas A&M.
Okay, and there you can lose that game.
This is my favorite game in the SEC this year.
Okay, hit me.
At UMass.
Oh god.
Who the hell plays at UMass? Like,
Did you see the unfortunate video for UMass of the guy
did.
saying what their stadium was? That's tough. That's tough.
So
but maybe it'll get better when they join. They're going to join the Mid-American Conference. So hopefully it gets better.
You know what
for
they say
for
about
all
the
the
Mid-American
UMass
Conference.
fans out there.
Auburn at home, at Alabama, at home against Oklahoma.
That's the stretch. That's the stretch right there. Those three
At
games.
South Carolina.
We're gonna know. I think early on, Missouri's gonna win their first 5 games or so. I think it was 5 where they're gonna win. But then that stretch in there that was that's got Texas A&M.
It's Auburn,
It's Auburn, Alabama,
Oklahoma, and then at South Carolina. That's not easy.
No, it's certainly not. But I think those 3 games, Auburn, Oklahoma, Alabama, you win 2 of those games, okay, I'm sold. But if you lose 2 or 3 of those games, now I think those apprehensions start to set in. But it's going to be a hot start for Missouri.
Totally.
I think they're one of the most interesting teams in the SEC. They haven't created these sort of offseason buzz that Ole Miss has necessarily with the transfers they brought in. But the other thing too, I was talking about this with Zach Blackerby at Locked On Auburn the other day. They haven't lost very much. Like they have a lot of their team still in place. They weren't ravaged by the portal, by quote-unquote
Theo
bigger
Weiss is
programs.
coming back.
Yes.
Lukey Cooper coming back. Obviously, Luther Burden coming back. I mean, 1, 2, 3 right there.
Yeah.
That's enough for me to feel really encouraged, even without Cody Schrader, even without that run game, a revised run game, let's say. Like, that's enough to make me feel really confident about what they can do.
And they have one of my favorite combinations in college football. They return their head coach and their quarterback because that is a fleeting thing nowadays. So, a couple fun programs to watch in the SEC this year. Caroline Fenton, Yahoo Sports. Appreciate the time.
Appreciate it.
Big Ten coaches have to win. Everyone's got to win. But who's got to win the most? Might be Lincoln Riley. That's coming up next. So recently, Paul Feinbaum took a shot at Lincoln Riley at USC, said he's been a disaster, it's a mess, it's terrible. There was this whole brouhaha about Lincoln Riley because, look, I guess we just forgot he won 11 games in his first year. Like, that just never happened. And look, all of you out there who think that I'm oddly defending Lincoln Riley and USC because I'm biased in some way, I would like you to go talk to USC fans and ask them what they think of me as it pertains to USC. I think the Lincoln Riley hate is going way too far. I mean, way too far. Now, I am, of course, but one person giving my opinion on the matter. So can I state that the pressure on Lincoln Riley to win is arguably greater than any other coach in the Big Ten? Yeah, I could argue that. Heck, you could argue it's really high on Dan Lanning and Ryan Day to win at a higher level, to get to a national championship game, or at least a national semifinal with the way that they have invested into their rosters with their NIL collectives and the amount of attention they've gotten in the transfer portal and the way they've recruited and the amount of time they've been there. Lanning's only in his 3rd season, but still, expectations for those 2 schools very, very high. James Franklin at Penn State, I think, can fit into this category as well. They've been the perennial bridesmaid, never the bride, as Joel Klatt adequately has said many times on his show. about Penn State in the playoff. They would have benefited more than any other program. If you'd had a 12-team playoff since 2014, they would have made it on multiple occasions, as in more than 2. I think the number's something like 5 or 6. If they go 10-2 again, make the playoff, I think that quiets things down as it pertains to, questions about James Franklin's long-term outlook and whether he can build Penn State into a national championship program. I think that remains to be seen, but I like what I've seen so far. There are just other levels that he still has to take. So the reason it comes back to Lincoln Riley is because last year was such a big drop-off from the prior year. Never mind that they started the year 6-0 and faltered down the stretch. You can say, well, that makes it a whole heck of a lot worse. They lost 5 of their last 6 games. Yep, they did that. And they ended the year 7-5. And then won a bowl game with a backup quarterback against a good Louisville team that was in the ACC championship. I think that's pretty impressive, which is why I look at the record and say, yeah, it's a good 8-5. But it's still 8-5. So their first week game, as Caroline and I were talking about against LSU, is going to put one of those coaches in a significantly negative light in the eyes of some of their fans. I don't think every fan is going to look at Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly, whoever loses that first week game in Las Vegas. It's going to be utterly fantastic. I am stoked to watch that game. It's on a Sunday, too, so it's going to be a standalone. Brian Kelly's 0-2 in week 1 non-conference games, by the way. Just kind of throwing that out there, and that game is closer to Los Angeles than it is to Baton Rouge. But if Lincoln Riley loses that game, I don't think the hot seat ratchets up because he's in year 3. He's in his 3rd season as the head coach of the University of Southern California. Are you going to fire someone or start talking about firing someone because he has an 11-3 season, an 8-5 season, and starts the year 0-1? Is that where you want to go? Because a conversation that I recall seeing play out in the media space or having with several fans as well over the years is Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. Jim Harbaugh was hired, by the way, Kirby Smart was hired like 2015, 2016 or so. That's roughly when Jim Harbaugh was hired at Michigan as well. He didn't win a national championship here until 2024. He didn't even make the playoffs until 2022. But you want to move on from a coach after year 3. You want to say, look, Paul Feinbaum can have whatever opinion he wants. That doesn't make him right. Because saying that Lincoln Riley's been a disaster? No. Was last year disappointing? Absolutely. Was it a nightmare season for USC? In many ways, yeah, it was. Because you saw the defensive cracks early in the year against teams like San Jose State, and then they reared their ugly head in a bad way, and the dam broke as the year went on, and they blew the game against Utah, and they couldn't stop Washington, and they lost pretty handily up at Oregon by double digits. Things really started to spiral, culminating in the loss against UCLA. I mean, that was not a great UCLA team. They were fine. They were 7-5. They were a real deal 7-5 football team. Losing that game, yeah, that was the disastrous point. Because I think even if you go 8-4 last year and you beat UCLA, and it wasn't Chip Kelly's first year at UCLA by any stretch of the imagination, the pressure conversation on Lincoln Riley is very different. But as it actually is, not as it could have been, Lincoln Riley, I think, is put under a microscope because he's at USC. Like, if you took over a program, let's think about it this way. USC's a big brand. They're playing in a big conference now. They've got plenty of money, and Lincoln Riley was a high-profile hire. He's going into year 3. His regular seasons, we'll just talk regular seasons here, 11-1, 7-5. Mike Elko is going to Texas A&M. High-profile program, a lot of money. He's not as big of a name. He doesn't generate the same sort of buzz. He's not as flashy. He's not as splashy of a name. If I did a segment on this show and put it on YouTube about Lincoln Riley, it's probably going to get more views than one about Mike Elko. That's just the way it goes. But if Mike Elko, in his first 2 years, taking over a program that has all the potential in the world but was in disarray because it wasn't run well by the previous administration, if he went 8-5, let's just flip the seasons, because college football, it can come down to a handful of plays. Let's say Mike Elko goes 8-5 this year and then 11-1 next year. What's your opinion of him? What's your opinion? He's doing great. He's building the program. But Lincoln Riley's flipped those years around. And because Lincoln Riley, for the first time ever in his coaching career, did not win 10 or more games, I'm supposed to believe that he's the village idiot, has no idea how to coach. He's going to flop in the Big Ten, has no idea what he's doing. Oh, he's not going to be able to play. Who do he hire as his defensive coordinator? Who do he hire? Again, I'm not sitting here saying that there isn't pressure on Lincoln Riley to win. They have a really, really tough schedule. So expecting them to make the Big Ten championship game is not where USC fans' heads should be at. If they win 8 or 9 games this year, ordinarily at USC, that's not up to the standard. But everyone wants to microwave things. And because Lincoln Riley and company had an 11-1 season in his first year, everyone expected, oh, you're going to be able to do that again, right? No, it's not that easy. It's not that easy, especially when wholesale changes needed to be made on the other side of the ball. If you want to argue that Lincoln Riley has set USC back on the timeline of the rebuild that he is overseeing because he didn't get rid of Alex Grinch sooner, I'm going to agree with you. I'm not going to push back on that notion. But any suggestion that Lincoln Riley is suddenly a horrible coach, or any suggestion that Lincoln Riley has no idea what he's doing, or that he's not making changes to make himself a better head coach, to run a better program, to win more games, I don't know where exactly it is coming from. He has become, I think, really low-hanging fruit because the criticism of him in recent years, 100% accurately, by the way, was, well, he didn't have a defense. He didn't have a good defensive coordinator. He's keeping his buddy around. Well, now he made the change, and the narrative around him hasn't changed. So do I expect USC to be a Big Ten contender this year? No, I think they're a dark horse team. I could see them going 9-3, only losing 2 Big Ten games and finding their way in the conference championship game. Yeah, I could see them doing that. I absolutely can. Is their defense going to be great this year? No. But is their offense going to be good? Yeah, it should be. I expect it to be. Certainly going to have the potential, certainly going to have the firepower. They brought in a guy in Kyle Ford from UCLA, a transfer, former 5-star wideout, and I think that's kind of an under-the-radar move. But when he's getting lost in the shuffle, look, is this the best receiving core Lincoln Riley's ever had? Probably not. Is it still above average? Yeah. yeah, it's way above average. So if you get what you need from Miller Moss, if your offensive line is just capable a little bit and your defense is just okay, I know I listed off 3 things, but I'm not asking for the world, then USC should be an 8 or 9 win team. And if they go 9-3 this year and they don't make the college football playoff, I don't want to hear that it was a failure of a season and that Lincoln Riley should be on the hot seat going into next year. Like, context, details, understanding the entirety of a situation all matter when talking about what a coach is capable of, what should be expected of him, and how much pressure he should be under. So Lincoln Riley is going to face more pressure in a lot of other people's heads than he faces in mine. So maybe you should just tune into this show more than the others. That'd be my advice. We'll see what he says this week at Big Ten Media Days. I will be there. Maybe I'll see some of you there. Who knows? Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.